What if the most beautiful love story of your life became your worst nightmare? What if the mother-in-law you tried so hard to please was actually planning your murder from the day you met? Christmas Eve, a Manhattan law office. Claire Montgomery signs divorce papers with trembling hands. But before she leaves, she places a small, wrapped gift beside the documents. Inside, a positive pregnancy test, and a note that reads, "Merry Christmas. You would have been an amazing father. This is what we lost." Her husband Nathaniel cheated for 3 years, but that was just the beginning because his mother Victoria had been orchestrating something far more sinister. A 60-year revenge plot, a family bloodline she was systematically erasing. And Claire, she was always the target. Arrested, framed, attacked while pregnant. Claire's baby born at 31 weeks while she fought for her life. But here's what Victoria didn't count on. Claire refused to be erased. This is the story of a woman who lost everything and built it back stronger. A love that died and chose to live again. A mother-in-law whose hatred destroyed herself. And a second chance that had to be earned, stroke by stroke, choice by choice. Before we begin, if stories of survival, justice, and love that refuses to quit speak to your soul, show me by hitting that like button. Drop a comment telling me if you believe in second chances. And subscribe, because you'll want to hear how this ends. Trust me, you've never heard a love story like this. Now, let's begin. The attorney's office smelled like pine and cinnamon candles, holiday cheer trying to mask the death of a marriage. Claire Montgomery sat alone at the mahogany conference table, divorce papers spread before her like a funeral arrangement. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sparkled under fresh December snow, couples walking hand in hand through the early evening darkness. Christmas Eve. Of course it had to be Christmas Eve. Her hand trembled as she lifted the pen. 7 years of marriage reduced to signatures and legal jargon. She glanced at the clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. By midnight, she would be legally single again. By morning, Nathaniel Ashford would wake up in someone else's bed, just like he had for the past 3 years. Claire pressed the pen to paper and signed her name. Once, twice, 3 times. Each signature felt like a small death. Tears dropped onto the documents, smudging the ink slightly, but she didn't care. Let them see her pain. Let them know this wasn't easy, wasn't wanted, wasn't fair. The attorney, a kind woman named Patricia with sympathetic eyes, stepped out to make copies. Claire sat in the sudden silence, staring at her hands. They looked older than 32 years should warrant, thinner too. She had lost 15 pounds in the past 2 months, ever since that night at the Plaza Hotel, when her whole world shattered like dropped crystal. She reached into her purse, fingers finding the small wrapped box she had brought. White paper, red silk ribbon, elegant and simple. Inside was a pregnancy test. Positive, 8 weeks along. She had found out 3 days after discovering her husband's affair. 3 days after her heart broke so completely, she thought she might actually die from it. Claire placed the box beside the signed divorce papers and pulled out a note card, her hand steadier now. She wrote in careful script, "Merry Christmas. You would have been an amazing father. This is what we lost. This is what we could have been. Goodbye, Nate. C." She stood, smoothed down her black dress, and walked toward the door. She didn't look back at the papers, the gift, the life she was leaving behind. But her voice, steady and clear, filled the empty room as she paused at the threshold. "Everyone thinks they know when love dies," she said softly to no one. To everyone. To herself. They're wrong. Love doesn't die. It just gets buried under lies until you can't remember what it looked like when it was alive. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. 7 years earlier, the Boston Gallery smelled like oil paint and possibility. Claire stood before a massive abstract canvas, gesturing expressively as she guided a small group of donors through the exhibition. At 25, she was the youngest curator the Bradford Gallery had ever hired, and she approached every tour with the passion of someone who still believed art could change the world. "Notice how the chaos in the upper left corner gradually transforms," she said, her voice warm and confident. "See how the artist uses color to create order from disorder? It's like watching a storm become a sunrise." "Tell me about this one." Claire turned. A man stood slightly apart from her group, tall and lean in an expensive suit that somehow didn't look pretentious on him. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, a smile that seemed genuinely curious rather than politely interested. Late 20s, she guessed. Probably a donor's son, obligated to attend. "What do you see?" she asked, the question she always started with. He stepped closer to the painting, studying it with real attention. "Honestly, chaos trying to become something beautiful, like it's fighting to make sense of itself." Claire felt her breath catch. In 3 years of giving gallery tours, no one had ever described it quite like that. "That's exactly right," she said quietly. The artist said this piece was about transformation, about how the most beautiful things often come from the messiest places. "I'm Nate," he said, extending his hand. "Nathaniel Ashford." "Claire Montgomery." His hand was warm, his grip firm, but not aggressive. She noticed he wore no wedding ring. "Would you have coffee with me?" he asked. "I'd love to hear more about your work. The gallery, I mean. Art. I'd love to hear about art." He was nervous. This confident man in his $1,000 suit was nervous asking her out. Claire smiled. "I get off at 6. "I'll wait," Nate said. "I've got nowhere more important to be." He waited, and that, Claire would think later, should have told her everything she needed to know. He waited for her then. He just forgot how to wait somewhere along the way. Their first date wasn't at a fancy restaurant. Nate brought wildflowers, daisies, and black-eyed Susans wrapped in brown paper, not expensive roses. He knew her favorite book was Jane Eyre because he had noticed it on her desk during the gallery tour and asked the receptionist. They had coffee at a tiny shop in the North End, talking for 4 hours straight about art and life and dreams. "I'm supposed to take over my family's real estate company," Nate told her, spinning his empty coffee cup between his hands. "It's what Ashfords do. Build empires, make millions, attend the right parties." "But," Claire prompted, "but I'd rather talk to you about why Van Gogh cut off his ear than discuss property values with my mother's country club friends." "Why did Van Gogh cut off his ear?" she asked, testing him. "Because he was in love and heartbroken and probably mentally ill, and sometimes pain is the only language we have." Nate met her eyes. "I think he was trying to make the inside match the outside, trying to make sense of chaos." Claire fell in love with him right then, in that tiny coffee shop with the crooked chairs and the barista who sang off-key to the radio. She fell in love with a man who understood that art wasn't about beauty. It was about truth. Their courtship was the most beautiful love story Claire had ever lived. Nate showed up at her apartment with picnic supplies on Saturday mornings. They would spread a blanket in Boston Common and read poetry to each other, taking turns choosing verses. He loved Frost. She loved Dickinson. They both loved E. E. Cummings. "I carry your heart with me," Nate read one golden October afternoon, leaves falling around them like benedictions. "I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear," Claire continued, knowing the poem by heart now. "And whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and she tasted coffee and promise and forever on his lips. When he finally brought her home to meet his parents, Claire wore her best dress, the navy blue one she saved for important gallery events. The Ashford Mansion in Manchester by the sea took her breath away. Columns, manicured gardens, an ocean view that probably cost more than her yearly salary. "Don't be nervous," Nate whispered, squeezing her hand as they walked up the stone steps. "They're going to love you." His father, James Ashford Sr., was kind in a distracted way, shaking her hand absently before retreating to his study with a crystal tumbler of scotch. But his mother, Victoria, studied Claire like a specimen under glass. Silk dress, perfect hair, eyes like chips of ice despite her polite smile. "A gallery curator," Victoria said over dinner, the words precise and cutting. "How quaint. And your family, dear, what do they do?" "My father's a mechanic," Claire said, lifting her chin. "My mother was a teacher before she passed. My grandmother raised me after that." "How difficult for you," Victoria murmured, but her eyes said what her mouth didn't. "Not good enough, not nearly good enough for my son." Nate's hand found Claire's under the table, squeezing 3 times. Their code. I love you. She squeezed back. After dinner, as they drove back to Boston, Nate was quiet. Your mother hates me, Claire said finally. My mother hates everyone, Nate replied. But I don't care. I love you. That's all that matters. Is it? Claire asked softly. Nate pulled the car over, right there on the highway, and turned to face her. Claire Montgomery, I don't care if you have ramen for furniture and student loans until you're 50. You make me happier than I've ever been in my entire life. My mother's opinion doesn't change that. Nothing changes that. He meant it. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. He meant every word. The question was whether he could keep meaning it when his mother started applying pressure. But Claire was young and in love, and stupid enough to think love conquered all. 6 months later, Nate proposed, not at a fancy restaurant or exotic vacation. He brought her back to the Bradford Gallery on a Tuesday evening when it was closed, got down on one knee in front of that same abstract painting where they had met. You taught me what beauty really is, he said, voice shaking slightly. Not wealth, not status, not all the things my family thinks matter. This, us, art and poetry and Saturday morning picnics. You taught me that the most beautiful things come from the messiest places, like us, like this crazy, unexpected, absolutely perfect love. The ring was simple, white gold, single diamond, elegant and understated. Claire didn't care if it cost $500 or $5,000. She cared that his hands were shaking, that there were tears in his eyes, that he looked at her like she was every poem he had ever read, every painting he had ever loved, every beautiful thing in the world compressed into one person. Yes, she whispered. Always yes, always you. They married 4 months later in a small ceremony that Victoria clearly disapproved of but couldn't prevent. Father Michael Ryan, a kind priest from Claire's childhood parish, officiated. Claire wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit. Nate wore a suit instead of a tuxedo. The guest list was 50 people instead of 500. Do you, Nathaniel James Ashford, promise to love Claire in sickness and health, in wealth and poverty, in joy and sorrow all the days of your life? Father Ryan asked. I do, Nate said, and he looked at her like she was the only person in the entire church, the entire world. Do you, Claire Elizabeth Montgomery, promise to love Nathaniel in sickness and health, in wealth and poverty, in joy and sorrow all the days of your life? I do, Claire said, and meant it with every atom of her being. Their first dance was to an acoustic guitar playing Ed Sheeran's Thinking Out Loud, because Nate said it reminded him of growing old with her. He whispered against her hair as they swayed, Every day with you will be Christmas morning, every single day. Claire believed him. God help her, she believed every word. The first year of marriage was everything she had dreamed. Breakfast in bed on Sunday mornings, Nate coming home with surprise flowers every Friday, dancing in the kitchen to music only they could hear, making love on lazy Saturday afternoons, learning each other's bodies and hearts and souls with patient attention. Nate hung her paintings throughout their apartment, insisted on buying from local artists, filled their home with color and light and beauty. When Claire worried about money, about giving up her gallery job to support his increasingly demanding career, he wrapped her in his arms and promised it was temporary. Just until the Shanghai deal closes, he said. Then I'll have proved myself to the board, and we can do things our way. I promise, Claire, this is temporary. She believed him. She wanted to believe him, because the alternative was admitting that Victoria was winning, that the pressure was changing him, that the man she married was slowly disappearing into the man his mother wanted him to be. But on their first anniversary, when he brought home champagne and strawberries and made love to her like she was precious and irreplaceable, Claire pushed those worries away. This was real. This love was real. Nothing could break something this beautiful. She would remember that thought later when everything shattered and wonder how she could have been so naive, how she could have believed that beautiful love stories always had beautiful endings. Year 2 brought subtle changes that Claire told herself weren't important. Nate working later, missing dinners occasionally, phone calls during their weekend time together. Victoria's increased presence in their lives, always with another emergency, another crisis only Nate could handle. The company needs you, Victoria would say, her voice honeyed poison. You can't keep playing house when there are millions of dollars at stake. Playing house, as if their marriage was a child's game, as if Claire herself was just a toy Nate would eventually outgrow. Claire quit her job at the gallery that year, not because she wanted to, but because Victoria made it clear that Ashford Wives didn't work. They hosted parties, they served on charity boards, they looked beautiful on their husbands' arms and kept their mouths shut about anything that mattered. It's just temporary, Nate said when Claire protested. Until I get established at the company, then you can go back to curating. I promise. More promises, more temporary situations that became permanent, more pieces of herself she gave away thinking she was investing in their future, not realizing she was selling herself at a loss. They started trying to conceive that year. Not because they were ready, but because Victoria mentioned grandchildren constantly. Because Nate thought a baby might make his mother accept Claire. Because Claire thought a baby might bring back the man she married. Month after month, the pregnancy test came back negative. Month after month, Claire felt like a failure. Month after month, Victoria's comments got sharper. Perhaps it's for the best, Victoria said one afternoon over tea at the mansion. Career should come first. Children are such a burden on a man's earning years. Claire wanted to throw her teacup against the wall. Wanted to scream that children weren't burdens, that love wasn't about earning potential, that Victoria's cold calculation of every human relationship was exactly what was poisoning her son. But she smiled politely and sipped her tea and hated herself for her silence. Year 3 brought distance. Nate traveled constantly. Shanghai, London, Dubai, cities that took him away for weeks at a time. When he was home, he was exhausted, distracted, always one phone call away from leaving again. Their anniversary dinner that year was interrupted 12 times by Nate's phone. 12 times he apologized. 12 times Claire watched him choose work over her. On the 13th call, she stood up. "Answer it," she said quietly. "Claire, I'm sorry. It's the Dubai investors. They're very particular about—" I said answer it. He did. And Claire walked out of the restaurant alone, took a cab home alone, cried herself to sleep alone. When Nate came home at 3 in the morning, she pretended to be asleep. "This deal is worth $50 million, Claire," he had said earlier, frustrated when she asked him to silence his phone. Just for one night, their anniversary. Just one night. "And what are we worth?" she had asked. He hadn't answered, and that silence told her everything she needed to know. Years 4 and 5 blurred together in a haze of loneliness. Claire rattled around their 12-room mansion like a ghost. Victoria practically lived there, always finding reasons to visit, always making subtle comments about the daycare, the meals, Claire's clothes, her hair, her inability to conceive. "My first daughter-in-law had 3 children by your age," Victoria mentioned one evening, referring to Nate's uncle's wife, who had died mysteriously decades ago. Of course, she came from good stock. Breeding tells. Claire's fertility specialist assured her everything was normal. "Sometimes stress affects conception," Dr. Helen Brooks said gently. "Are things difficult at home?" "Everything's fine," Claire lied. Nothing was fine. She hadn't painted in 18 months. Her art supplies gathered dust in the room Nate had promised would be her studio, the room that was now Victoria's preferred guest suite. Claire ate dinner alone most nights, slept alone most nights, lived alone in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside and felt like a slow death on the inside. She found the credit card charge on a Tuesday. The Plaza Hotel, penthouse suite, $800. When she asked Nate about it, he barely looked up from his laptop. "Business meeting space," he said. "We needed somewhere private for the Shanghai investors." "For 3 hours on a Thursday afternoon?" Claire asked. "Yes," Nate said, and his eyes finally met hers. "Is this really what you want to fight about right now? I'm trying to close a deal that will set us up for life. Us. As if they were still in us. As if they hadn't become I and I, living parallel lives that never quite intersected anymore." Claire stopped asking questions, stopped trying to conceive, stopped hoping things would get better. She simply existed, going through motions, waiting for something to change or end or explode. She got all 3 on a snowy December night 2 weeks before Christmas. The nausea started suddenly. Claire woke at dawn, barely making it to the bathroom before throwing up. She blamed it on stress, bad food, the sleeping pills she had started taking just to get 4 hours of peace. But the nausea continued for 3 days straight, and when she finally took a pregnancy test, more out of habit than hope, she watched the pink lines appear with shock. Positive. Claire stared at the test, hands shaking. 8 weeks, maybe. Which meant it happened during their last attempt at intimacy, that awkward encounter in early October when they had both been trying to remember what passion felt like. For the first time in months, Claire felt something other than numb despair. She felt joy. Fragile and terrified, but joy nonetheless. This was their second chance. This was the thing that would remind Nate of what mattered. This was their beautiful ending, finally arriving after all the pain. She planned the reveal carefully, set up a romantic dinner at home. Candles, his favorite meal, soft music. She bought a tiny Christmas ornament engraved with "Baby's First Christmas" and wrapped it carefully. She wore the dress he had loved, the green one that brought out her eyes. At 6 o'clock, she called him. "Don't forget dinner tonight," she said, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. "It's important." "Actually," Nate said, and her heart sank before he even continued. "Mom called an emergency board meeting. Shanghai investors are threatening to pull out. I need to handle this. Nate, please. Just tonight, I really need Claire. I don't have time for this right now. We'll do dinner this weekend, I promise." The line went dead. Claire stood in her candlelit dining room looking at the carefully prepared meal, the gift, the life she had imagined sharing with him. And something inside her cracked. She opened the Find My iPhone app, a feature they had shared years ago, back when checking on each other felt sweet instead of suspicious. The little dot showed Nate's location, the Plaza Hotel, not at Ashford Real Estate headquarters, not at a restaurant with investors, at the Plaza, at the same hotel where he had been charging mysterious meetings for months. Claire grabbed her coat and keys. The drive through snowy streets took 20 minutes. 20 minutes where she told herself there was an explanation. 20 minutes where she tried to convince herself she was being paranoid. 20 minutes of lying to herself one last time. The hotel lobby was decorated for Christmas. Garland and lights and a massive tree that probably cost more than her car. Claire walked to the elevators with her head high, used the key card from their anniversary stay 2 years ago that Nate didn't know she had kept. The penthouse level was silent. She walked down the plush carpeted hallway, heart pounding, telling herself to turn around, knowing she wouldn't. She used the key card on Suite 1222. The door opened silently. The living area was empty, but she heard sounds from the bedroom. Laughter, female laughter, and Nate's voice lighter and happier than she had heard it in years. Claire pushed open the bedroom door. Her husband was in bed with a woman Claire recognized from company events. Amber Sterling, Victoria's goddaughter. 28, blonde, beautiful in that effortless way Claire had never managed. They were tangled in sheets, clearly post-coitus, drinking champagne and laughing about something on Amber's phone. Amber saw Claire first. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed into something like satisfaction. "Oh," as she said sweetly, "Merry Christmas, Claire." Nate's head whipped around. The color drained from his face. "Claire, this isn't—" "How long?" Claire asked. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Claire, let me explain." "How long, Nathaniel?" Amber sat up, making no effort to cover herself. "Since your honeymoon, sweetie. He called me from Bora Bora, said he needed real excitement, said his wife was boring in bed." "Amber, shut up!" Nate scrambled out of bed, reaching for his pants. "That's not true. Claire, she's lying." "Am I?" Amber laughed then. "Tell her about the Shanghai trips, baby. Tell her about London. Tell her about all those business meetings that were really just us in five-star hotels." Claire felt like she was falling. The room tilted and spun. 3 years. He had been lying to her for 3 years. While she was crying over negative pregnancy tests, he was with Amber. While she was eating dinner alone, he was with Amber. While she was dying inside their marriage, he was very much alive in someone else's bed. She doubled over, hand instinctively going to her stomach, to the tiny life growing there. The baby who would now grow up in a broken home because her father couldn't keep his pants zipped. "How long?" she whispered again. Nate stood frozen, pants half on, looking at her with something like horror. 3 years, he said finally. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But it didn't mean anything. It was just, I'm pregnant, Claire said. The words fell into silence. Amber's smile faded. Nate stared at her like she had spoken a foreign language. What? He breathed. I'm pregnant, Claire repeated. 8 weeks. I came to tell you we're having a baby. I thought... She laughed, the sound broken and bitter. I thought it would save us. Amber recovered first. Oh, this is rich. The boring wife finally manages to trap him. Something snapped in Claire. She looked at Nate, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The man she loved was gone. Maybe he had been gone for years. Maybe he had never really existed at all. I want a divorce, she said clearly. Claire, wait. Nate lurched forward. Please, let me explain. But Claire was already moving, running for the elevator. Nate chased her, shirtless, still pulling on his pants, creating a scene in the hallway that would definitely make tomorrow's society pages. Wait, please, just listen. He caught her arm at the elevator. Claire yanked free. There's nothing to explain. You made your choice. 3 years ago. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. Nate tried to follow, but another guest was waiting. Claire hit the close button frantically. Claire, please. Nate's voice broke. I love you. You love yourself more, Claire said, and as the door slid shut on his devastated face, you always have. She made it to her Diane before the tears came. Made it out of the parking garage before the sobs took over. Made it halfway home before she had to pull over and cry so hard she couldn't breathe. Her phone rang 15 times. Nate. Every time. She finally turned it off. When she got home, the candles had burned down. The dinner had gone cold. The little Christmas ornament sat in its box, a promise that would never be kept. Claire walked upstairs, packed a bag with shaking hands, and drove to Maya Rodriguez's apartment, her best friend since college, a criminal defense attorney who had warned her about the Ashfords from the beginning. Maya opened the door in pajamas, took one look at Claire's face and pulled her inside. He cheated, Claire said. For 3 years, and I'm pregnant. Maya wrapped her in a hug. We're going to fix this, I promise. We're going to make him pay. But Claire shook her head. I don't want revenge. I just want it to be over. She didn't know yet that it had only just begun, that Victoria Ashford had been waiting for exactly this moment, that the trap had been set years ago, and Claire had just walked into it willingly. She didn't know that the most beautiful love story of her life was about to become a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Christmas morning dawned gray and cold. Claire woke in Maya's guest room, disoriented and nauseous. For one blessed moment, she forgot. Then memory crashed back and she ran for the bathroom to throw up. Morning sickness, the doctor had called it. Except it wasn't morning and it wasn't sick. It was heartbreak manifesting as physical pain. Her phone showed 52 missed calls from Nate. She deleted them all without listening. At 6:30, someone pounded on Maya's apartment door. Claire heard Nate's voice, desperate and loud enough to wake the neighbors. Claire, please, you're pregnant. We can fix this. Open the door. Maya appeared in Claire's doorway, already dressed, furious. Stay here, she ordered. Claire heard the front door open, heard Maya's voice low and dangerous. She doesn't want to see you. That's my baby, Nate shouted. No, Maya said coldly. It's her baby. You lost rights when you cheated for 3 years. Now leave before I call the cops. I love her. You loved yourself more. Now leave. The door slammed. Claire curled into a ball on the bed, hand on her stomach. I'm sorry, she whispered to the tiny life inside her. I'm so sorry your father is a coward. At noon, a courier arrived with papers from Victoria's attorneys. Claire's hands shook as she read. They're claiming you signed a prenuptial agreement, Maya said, reading over her shoulder. One that leaves you with virtually nothing in case of divorce. I did sign a prenup, Claire said numbly. Victoria insisted. But Nate promised it was just a formality. Let me see the original. Maya disappeared into her home office, returned 20 minutes later with a grim expression. There's an adultery clause. If you can prove Nate cheated, the prenup is void. You'd be entitled to half of everything. For the first time that day, Claire felt something other than despair. I have hotel records. I took photos at the plaza, timestamps, everything. Good, Maya said. Then we fight. That afternoon, Claire drove to the Ashford mansion to collect her belongings. She had called ahead, made sure Nate would be gone. But Victoria was waiting. The older woman sat in the formal living room like a queen on a throne, perfectly composed in Chanel, drinking tea from China that probably cost more than Claire's car. Ah, Claire, Victoria said, making a scene I see. I'm collecting my things, Claire replied, keeping her voice steady. Then I'll be gone. Oh, you'll be gone regardless, Victoria smiled. You signed a prenup, dear. Quite airtight. You'll leave with nothing. Claire pulled the prenup from her bag. This says in case of adultery, the agreement is void. I have proof. Victoria's eye twitched, just slightly, the first crack in her perfect composure. You'll have to prove adultery in court. Good luck with that. I have hotel records, photos, credit card statements. Circumstantial. Victoria waved a manicured hand. Nathaniel will deny everything. Amber will deny everything. It will be your word against the Ashford family fortune. How do you think that will play out? Claire's heart sank. She hadn't considered that part. The resources Victoria could marshal, the lawyers she could hire, the judges she probably owned. I'm pregnant, she said, with your grandchild. Victoria's face went cold, Arctic cold. Allegedly. What? Paternity tests exist, dear, and given your desperation to trap my son, one wonders who the father really is. The words hit Claire like a physical blow. How dare you? Oh, please, Victoria stood. You're not the first gold digger to try this trick. Get pregnant, claim it's his, demand a settlement. I've seen it dozens of times. I love him, Claire shouted, control finally breaking. I've loved him since the day I met him. Then you're a fool, Victoria said simply. Love is for children and poets. Adults understand that marriage is a business arrangement. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Claire whispered. Sad? Victoria laughed. I've been married to James for 40 years. I have wealth, status, power. What do you have? A baby you can't prove is Nathaniel's, and a prenup that leaves you destitute. Who's sad now? Nate chose that moment to arrive home, drawn by raised voices. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, eyes red-rimmed. Claire, what he said, please, let's talk. There's nothing to talk about, Claire said. I want a divorce. Mother, stop it. Nate turned to Victoria. Claire has proof. The hotel, the credit cards, everything. Just let her go with dignity. Dignity? Victoria's voice dripped venom. She has no dignity. She's a Montgomery. Common trash trying to steal what we built. What you built? Claire stared at her. Your family fortune came from tax fraud and insider trading in the 1960s. Don't talk to me about dignity. Silence. Oh, Victoria's face went white. Get out, she whispered. Get out of my house. Gladly. Claire headed for the stairs to get her belongings. So Claire, Nate followed. I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry. Let me fix this. I'll end things with Amber. I'll go to therapy, whatever you need. What I need is a husband who didn't cheat on me for 3 years, Claire said. Can you give me that? He couldn't answer. That's what I thought. Claire continued upstairs, packed her clothes, her books, the few things that were truly hers. Nate stood in the doorway watching. I'll fight the prenup, he said finally. I'll make sure you're taken care of. I don't want your charity, Claire replied. I just want to be free. That evening, alone in Maya's guest room, Claire called the attorney's office. Patricia answered on the first ring. I'll file the divorce papers tomorrow, Patricia said. Given the adultery clause and the evidence you have, I'm confident we can get the prenup overturned. You should walk away with a substantial settlement. I don't want his money, Claire said. I just want it to be over. Let's focus on getting you justice first, Patricia replied. Money gives you options. Options give you freedom. And freedom is what you need right now. After they hung up, Claire sat in the dark, hand on her stomach. The baby, her baby, their baby, growing inside her. A baby who would never know their parents as a couple. Never have Christmas mornings with both mommy and daddy. Never have that beautiful love story Claire had dreamed of giving her children. I'm sorry, she whispered again. But I promise you this. I will love you enough for both of us. I will protect you. I will never let anyone make you feel less than worthy. Not Victoria, not your father, not anyone. The baby couldn't hear her yet. But Claire needed to say the words anyway. Needed to make the promise that would keep her fighting through everything that was coming. Everything Victoria had planned. Everything Claire didn't know was waiting in the dark. 1 month later, January arrived like a punishment. Claire lived in Maya's spare room, her entire life reduced to 2 suitcases and a growing belly. The prenup battle dragged on. Victoria's lawyers filed motion after motion, delaying everything, burying Patricia under paperwork designed to exhaust Claire's resources. The $50,000 divorce settlement the prenup guaranteed sat in escrow, frozen by Victoria's legal maneuvers. Claire had exactly $800 in her checking account. Her credit cards, all linked to Nate's accounts, had been canceled. She tried to find work, but her 5-year gap in employment in the Ashford scandal made her untouchable. Ashford drama was how the gossip sites described it. Gold digger claims pregnancy to trap billionaire heir. Claire watched her reputation destroyed in real time. The beautiful narrative of their courtship, rewritten as calculated seduction. Victoria's PR team worked overtime. Maya helped where she could, but even lawyers couldn't work for free. Claire owed her best friend $12,000 already. The guilt ate at her like acid. At 12 weeks pregnant, Claire went to her first OB appointment at a public health clinic. No private doctor for Ashford scandal wives. She sat in a waiting room that smelled like disinfectant and desperation, surrounded by women who looked as exhausted as she felt. Claire Montgomery, the nurse called. The exam room was small and cold. Dr. Helen Brooks, the clinic physician, was kind but efficient. Time was money, and the clinic had 50 patients waiting. Everything looks healthy, Dr. Brooks said, running the ultrasound wand over Claire's belly. You're measuring right at 12 weeks. Would you like to hear the heartbeat? Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. The room filled with sound, fast, strong, impossibly beautiful. Whoosh, 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 the sound of life, the sound of hope, the sound of everything Claire was fighting for. That's my baby, she whispered. That's your baby, Dr. Brooks confirmed. Strong heartbeat, good growth. You're going to be a wonderful mother. Claire broke down crying, great gasping sobs that she couldn't control. Dr. Brooks handed her tissues, squeezed her shoulder, said nothing. Sometimes silence was the kindest gift. I don't have insurance, Claire finally managed. I don't have money. I don't even have a home. We have programs, Dr. Brooks said gently, support systems. You're not alone in this. But Claire felt alone, desperately, terrifyingly alone. She walked out of the clinic into gray January sleet, hand on her belly, wondering how she would survive the next 7 months, wondering if her baby would be born into poverty because Claire had been stupid enough to fall in love with the wrong man. The phone call came that afternoon. Claire was making ramen in Maya's kitchen when her phone rang with an unknown number. Is Montgomery? Maria? This is Frank Williams, attorney for your grandmother's estate. Claire's heart stopped. My grandmother? Yes, I'm sorry to inform you that she passed away 2 weeks ago. The funeral was held last Thursday. What? Claire's legs gave out. She slid down the kitchen cabinets to the floor. No one told me. My family, they said. Your family was instructed not to contact you, Mr. Williams said carefully, by Mrs. Victoria Ashford. She convinced them it was in everyone's best interest. Of course she did. Of course Victoria had stolen even this, Claire's last chance to say goodbye to the woman who raised her. However, Mr. Williams continued, your grandmother left you an inheritance, $300,000. She'd been saving her entire life. She wanted you to have security. Claire couldn't breathe, couldn't think. $300,000. Enough to raise her baby, enough to start over, enough to survive. When can I access it, she asked. I can have the funds transferred within 48 hours. That night, for the first time in months, Claire slept without crying. She had hope, fragile and terrifying, but hope nonetheless. She could do this. She could raise her baby. She could build a life. She should have known better. The legal notice arrived 3 days later, delivered by courier while Claire was apartment hunting. She opened it in the parking lot of a modest two-bedroom she could finally afford. "You have got to be kidding me," she breathed. Maya read over her shoulder, then swore viciously. "She's suing you for grand larceny. Claims you stole $2.8 million worth of jewelry from the Ashford mansion. I never took anything. The wedding gifts were given to me. She says otherwise. Look." Maya pointed to the attached documentation. "She has security footage of you entering the mansion vault 3 days before you moved out, removing items, and a witness statement from the head of security confirming you had access." "That's impossible. I never went to the vault. I didn't even know where it was." But the evidence was there. Clear video footage showing Claire, or someone who looked exactly like Claire, entering the mansion's secure vault area, removing jewelry cases, loading them into designer bags. "It's doctored," Maya said immediately. "We'll get forensic analysis, prove the timestamps are wrong." The video edited. "With what money?" Claire asked. "That analysis cost tens of thousands of dollars." "We'll use your inheritance." "Judge Morrison froze it," Claire read from the legal notice. "Pending resolution of the theft charges. All $300,000 is now locked up by court order." She was back to nothing. Worse than nothing. She was facing criminal charges for theft she didn't commit, charges that carried prison time. "Victoria planned this," Claire said numbly. "She let me think I had an escape route, then slammed the door shut. She's been planning this the whole time." "We'll fight it," Maya promised. "I'll work pro bono if I have to. But Claire, you need to understand, this is serious. If she can make the charges stick, you're looking at 7 to 15 years. What about the baby?" Maya was silent. That silence told Claire everything she needed to know. If she went to prison pregnant, she would give birth in chains. Her baby would be taken by social services. Or worse, given to Nate and Victoria. The woman trying to destroy Claire would raise her daughter. "I need to call Benjamin Hartford," Maya said suddenly. "The investigator I know. He's been looking into Victoria for years. If anyone can help us, it's him." Benjamin Hartford arrived the next morning. 40 years old, lean and intense, with eyes that had seen too much pain. Claire remembered his mother vaguely from news reports. Elizabeth Hartford, who had married into a wealthy family and then vanished without a trace in 1998. "Thank you for seeing me," Benjamin said, as they sat in Maya's living room. "I know this is difficult." "Maya said you've been investigating Victoria," Claire replied. "For 27 years," Benjamin confirmed. "Since the day my mother disappeared. I was 13. Victoria was the last person to see her alive." "The police were bought off," Benjamin said flatly. "Victoria has connections everywhere. Judges, prosecutors, police chiefs. My mother's case was ruled a voluntary disappearance. They closed the investigation in 2005. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Victoria is using the same playbook on you that she used on my mother. Frame for theft, isolate from family, destroy reputation. Then either force you to disappear or make you wish you had." Claire felt ice in her veins. "What happened to your mother?" "I don't know," Benjamin said. "But I intend to find out. And I think helping you might help me find her. Victoria's slipping. She's getting arrogant. She planted evidence against you, but she's not as careful as she used to be. We can prove the video is doctored." "With what money?" "Mine," Benjamin said simply. "I'll hire the forensic analysts, the investigators, whatever you need." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because you're not a stranger," Benjamin replied. "You're another woman Victoria Ashford is trying to destroy, and I'm tired of letting her win." That night, police arrived at Maya's apartment. Claire was making dinner, humming softly to her belly, lost in thought about baby names. The knock on the door was sharp and official. Maya answered. Claire heard the words that changed everything. "Claire Montgomery, you're under arrest for grand larceny." "No!" Claire ran to the living room, but 2 officers were already inside. "I didn't take anything, I swear." "You have the right to remain silent," the female officer said, pulling out handcuffs. "Please." Claire's hands went to her stomach. "I'm pregnant." "We're aware," the male officer said. "We've called for a female officer to handle processing." The handcuffs clicked around Claire's wrists. Cold metal. Inescapable. The death of freedom. Maya was on the phone immediately, calling Patricia, calling bail bondsmen, calling anyone who could help. But Claire barely heard her. She was being walked out of the apartment in handcuffs while neighbors stared. Paparazzi tipped off by Victoria's people were waiting on the street. Flash, flash, flash. Photographs that would be on TMZ within the hour. Instagram within 2. Twitter trending by tonight. The mugshot was worse. Pregnant, exhausted, humiliated. The flash that captured her at her lowest moment. The photo Victoria would leak to every media outlet in the country. Social media exploded. Hashtag Gold Digger Claire trended nationwide. The comments were vicious. She trapped him with a pregnancy, then stole jewelry. Lock her up and throw away the key. Ashford should sue for defamation too. Claire spent 36 hours in jail. 36 hours in a cell that smelled like urine and desperation. 36 hours listening to other women's stories, learning that she wasn't special, wasn't unique, was just another woman destroyed by people with power and money and no conscience. Maya scraped together $50,000 for bail, 10% down. Claire was released on her own recognizance, required to wear an ankle monitor, forbidden to leave the state. She walked out of jail into camera flashes and shouted questions she didn't answer. Benjamin was waiting with a car. He drove her back to Maya's apartment in silence, giving her the dignity of not having to explain how it felt to be arrested for crimes she didn't commit while carrying the child of a man who destroyed her. That night, Claire had cramps, sharp, stabbing pains that woke her at 3 in the morning. She stumbled to the bathroom and saw blood on her underwear. "No," she whispered. "No, please, not my baby. Please." Maya drove her to the emergency room at 90 miles an hour. Dr. Brooks met them there, called in by the ER physician. "You're having contractions," Dr. Brooks said after the examination. "At 14 weeks, this is very serious. The stress from the arrest—" "Am I losing the baby?" Claire asked. "Not yet, but if we can't stop the contractions, you might." They gave her medication, hooked her to monitors, made her lie still while the baby's heartbeat filled the room. Still strong, still fighting. "She's a fighter," Dr. Brooks said, "just like her mama." The bill for the emergency room visit was $28,000. Claire had no insurance, no money, no way to pay it, but she had her baby, for now, and that was everything. She was released 12 hours later with orders for strict bed rest. But as they wheeled her to Maya's car, Claire saw the headlines on the television in the waiting room. "Pregnant thief collapses after arrest. Faking medical emergency?" Victoria had gotten to the media first, spinning the narrative, making Claire's near miscarriage look like manipulation. And Claire realized, sitting in that wheelchair with her hand on her belly, that Victoria wasn't trying to break her. Victoria was trying to erase her, and she was very, very close to succeeding. 2 weeks of bed rest gave Claire too much time to think. She lay in Maya's guest room, staring at the ceiling, hand on her belly, feeling the baby move with increasing frequency. Tiny flutters at first, then stronger movements. Life asserting itself despite everything. Benjamin visited daily, brought food, books, kept her company. He told her about his mother, about growing up without her, about spending his entire adult life searching for answers that Victoria's money and power kept just out of reach. "She was an artist," Benjamin said one afternoon, showing Claire photos on his phone. "My mother, she painted watercolors. Nothing famous, just beautiful." The woman in the photos looked happy. Blonde hair, warm smile, paint-stained fingers holding a small boy. Benjamin, maybe 5 years old, laughing at something his mother said. "You look like her," Claire observed. "I have her eyes," Benjamin agreed, "but I don't remember her well enough. I was 13 when she disappeared. Old enough to remember her presence, but too young to remember who she really was." "What did Victoria do to her?" "I don't know exactly, but I know Victoria hated her from the moment my uncle brought her home. Said she was common trash, a gold digger." "Sound familiar?" Claire's blood ran cold. "She's using the same playbook." "Exactly. My mother supposedly stole family heirlooms before disappearing. Victoria filed a police report, but my mother never ran. She loved us too much. If she vanished, someone made her vanish." "How did you end up working in real estate?" "Know your enemy," Benjamin said simply. "I built my career specifically to get close to the Ashford Empire, to understand how Victoria operates. It's taken me 20 years, but I finally have enough the connections, enough resources to fight back. Why now? Because you're the first woman to survive long enough to make it to criminal proceedings. Jennifer Thompson, Victoria's victim from 1987, died by suicide before the trial. Lisa Chen in 2002 was institutionalized. My mother vanished. But you, Benjamin leaned forward. You're still standing, and that terrifies Victoria. It's why she's getting sloppy. Benjamin's forensic team worked around the clock. A week after Claire's arrest, they had results. The security footage was edited, the lead analyst explained via video call. Maya, Claire, and Benjamin crowded around the laptop. See these timestamps? They're inserted. Someone took footage of Ms. Montgomery from different days at different times and spliced it together to make it look like she entered the vault on December 4th. Can you prove it in court? Maya asked. Absolutely. I've prepared a full technical breakdown. No competent judge would accept this as legitimate evidence. The next breakthrough came from Benjamin's investigators. They tracked down Richard Moss, Victoria's head of security, the man who had supposedly witnessed Claire stealing the jewelry. I'll testify, Richard said when they met at a diner in Brooklyn. He looked ill, gray-faced, hands shaking. I'll tell them Victoria ordered me to create the footage, that she paid me $200,000. Why did you do it? Claire asked. Richard's eyes filled with tears. My daughter has cancer, leukemia. The treatments cost $40,000 a month. Victoria said if I didn't do what she asked, she'd blacklist my family from every hospital in New York. Said Sarah would die waiting for treatment. Claire felt sick. She used your daughter to blackmail you. She uses everyone, Richard said. I'm so sorry, Ms. Montgomery. I never thought she'd actually arrest you. I thought it was just leverage for the divorce settlement amount. We have bank records, Benjamin added, sliding printouts across the table. Wire transfer of $200,000 from Victoria's personal trust to Richard's account. Same day the footage was created. Maya smiled grimly. We've got her. The relief lasted exactly 3 days. Claire was cleared to resume light activity. No more bed rest, though she still needed to be careful. At 16 weeks, her pregnancy was visible now, a small, rounded belly that made strangers smile at her in coffee shops. She went for a walk one morning, needing air and movement and hope. Spring was trying to arrive. Crocuses pushed through patches of melting snow. The sky was blue for the first time in weeks. She didn't notice the car following her until it was too late. Amber Sterling stepped out, accompanied by a man Claire had never seen. Large, muscular, wearing sunglasses despite the cloud cover. Hired muscle. Amber, Claire said, already backing away. What do you want? Victoria says hello, Amber replied. Please, I'm pregnant. That's the point, sweetie. Amber nodded to the man. He grabbed Claire's arm. She screamed, tried to pull away, but he was too strong. He dragged her toward the car. Help! Someone help me! The street was empty. Brooklyn on a Tuesday morning. Everyone at work. No witnesses. Suddenly, another car screeched to a stop. Nate jumped out, and for a moment, Claire thought she was hallucinating. What was he doing here? Get your hands off my wife, Nate shouted. The thug hesitated. Nate charged. He wasn't a fighter, wasn't prepared, but desperation gave him strength. He swung wild, connected with the man's jaw. They fought. Nate was losing badly, taking hits that would leave bruises, but he kept getting up, kept putting himself between Claire and danger. Then sirens. Detective Sarah Winters, who Claire had met during the arrest, appeared with 2 squad cars. Police! Hands up! The thug and Amber were arrested, but in the struggle, Claire had been shoved hard against the car. She collapsed on the pavement, bleeding. No, she whispered. My baby. Please, my baby. The ambulance ride blurred with pain and fear. Dr. Brooks met them at the hospital, already scrubbed for surgery. She's hemorrhaging, Dr. Brooks told the surgical team. Baby's in distress. We need to do an emergency C-section now. But it's too early, Claire protested weakly. Only 31 weeks. If we don't deliver now, you could both die. Nate held her hand as they wheeled her to surgery. You're going to be okay. Both of you. Nate, I should have protected you, he said, and he was crying. I should have stopped her months ago. This is my fault. Save my baby, Claire said. Please, whatever happens to me, Save my baby. The anesthesia took her under. Claire's grandmother stood in a garden filled with light. Claire recognized it from childhood. The small plot behind the house where Grammy had grown tomatoes and roses. It's not your time yet, sweetheart, Grammy said. I'm so tired, Claire replied. I know, but she needs you. Your baby girl. She needs her mama. What if I can't do it? What if Victoria wins? Victoria's already lost, Grammy said. She lost the moment she decided money was more important than love. You haven't lost that. Don't let her take that from you too. Light pulled Claire back. She woke to machines beeping, tubes in her arms, and Nate's face hovering over hers. He looked terrible, unshaven, red-eyed, like he hadn't slept in days. My baby, Claire whispered. She's alive, Nate said quickly. 3 pounds, 2 ounces. Tiny, but fighting. She's in the NICU. They're taking good care of her. I want to see her. Soon. You need to recover first. You coded, Claire. Your heart stopped for 43 seconds. But I came back. You came back, Nate agreed. You're too stubborn to die. It almost made her smile. Detective Winters arrived that afternoon with news. We arrested Victoria Ashford this morning. Claire tried to sit up, winced. For what? For attempted murder. Amber wore a wire, cut a deal for immunity in exchange for testimony. We have Victoria on tape ordering the attack. Quote, I don't care how you do it. The Hartford baby dies tonight. The words hung in the air. Hartford baby. What? Claire asked. There's more, Detective Winter said. Benjamin's investigators found remains on the Ashford estate, buried in the garden. Elizabeth Hartford, Benjamin's mother. DNA confirmed. Benjamin, standing in the doorway, made a sound like a wounded animal. You found her? I'm so sorry it took so long, Detective Winter said. But we have her now, and we have evidence that Victoria killed her. We found Victoria's handwritten confession in her personal safe. She kept it like a trophy. Claire's mind reeled. Why? Why did she hate the Hartfords so much? Because in 1962, Caroline Hartford exposed Victoria's father for tax fraud and insider trading. He went to prison. The family lost everything. Victoria was 12 years old. She's been systematically destroying every Hartford descendant she can find ever since. But I'm not a Hartford, Claire said. Yes, you are, Benjamin said quietly. My investigators found your adoption records. Your biological grandmother was Caroline Hartford. Your family, Claire. You're the bloodline Victoria's been trying to erase. The world tilted. Everything she thought she knew about herself was wrong. She wasn't just Claire Montgomery from Boston. She was Claire Hartford, part of a family Victoria had been murdering for 60 years. How many? Claire asked. How many people did she kill? We're still investigating, Detective Winter said, but we found evidence of at least 4 deaths Victoria was involved in. Your case gave us the break we needed. She got arrogant, left evidence, made mistakes. What happens now? Now we put her away forever, Detective Winter said, and you get to hold your daughter. The NICU was quiet, filled with soft beeping and the whoosh of ventilators. Claire's daughter lay in an isolette, tiny and perfect, surrounded by wires and tubes. 3 pounds, 2 ounces, barely bigger than a butternut squash, but alive, fighting. You can hold her, the nurse said, skin to skin. It's good for preemies. They laid the baby on Claire's bare chest, impossibly small, impossibly warm, impossibly perfect. Claire felt tears streaming down her face. Hi, baby girl, she whispered. I'm your mama. I'm so sorry you had to come early, but you're safe now. We're both safe. The baby's eyes opened. Dark blue, unfocused, but looking in Claire's direction, like she recognized her mother's voice. She's been listening to you all along, the nurse said. Babies know their mother's heartbeat, their mother's voice. She knows you. Claire held her daughter and cried, for everything they'd survived, for everything still to come, for the beautiful love story that had turned into a nightmare, but somehow, miraculously, wasn't over yet. Nate stood outside the NICU, watching through the glass, not allowed in yet, not legally the father of record, but watching, always watching. And for the first time in months, Claire thought maybe, possibly, there might be a way forward. Not forgiveness, not yet, but forward. That was something. 6 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings and hospital vigils. Claire's daughter, whom she named Sophia Hartford Montgomery, spent 9 weeks in the NICU before coming home. 9 weeks of alarms and feeding tubes and terrifying moments when breathing stopped and nurses rushed in. But Sophia fought. Every day she gained weight, grew stronger, proved she was her mother's daughter. Claire lived in Benjamin's guest house during this time. He had insisted, and she was too exhausted to argue. The small cottage on his Brooklyn property gave her privacy but kept her close to people who actually cared whether she lived or died. Maya visited daily. Detective Winters called with updates. Even Dr. Brooks checked in weekly, maternal instinct extending beyond clinic walls. Nate came every day to the NICU, sat outside, not allowed in because Claire hadn't put him on the visitor list. But he came, brought coffee for Claire, never pushed, never demanded, just waited, patient and humble in a way he'd never been during their marriage. "You don't have to keep coming," Claire told him one morning. "Yes, I do," Nate replied. "That's my daughter in there. And you're still my wife. Legally separated, but not divorced yet, and I don't want to be." Claire looked at him, really looked. He'd lost weight, had shadows under his eyes, wore jeans instead of designer suits, drove a Honda instead of his Porsche. "What happened to you, Bawana?" she asked. "I woke up," Nate said simply, "the day I saw your face in that mugshot, pregnant and terrified and alone because of me. I realized I'd spent 5 years building an empire and losing a kingdom." Pretty words. I know, I'm good at those. What I'm not good at is following through, but I'm learning. He pulled out his phone, showed her recordings, dozens of them. "I've been recording my mother for 6 weeks. Every conversation, every plan, every evil thing she's said. Why? To make sure she never hurts anyone again, especially you." Claire took the phone, listened to a clip. Victoria's voice, cold and clear. "That Hartford babe East tonight. I don't care what it costs. You gave this to the police?" "All of it," Nate confirmed. 47 hours of recordings. Proof of conspiracy, murder, fraud, everything. I testified against her at the grand jury, my own mother. That must have been difficult. She stopped being my mother the day she tried to kill you." Nate's voice was flat, hard. "I'm done protecting her. I'm done being weak." For the first time in months, Claire felt something besides anger when she looked at him. Not forgiveness, not love, but acknowledgement. He was trying. Whether it was enough remained to be seen. Victoria's trial began in July. The courthouse steps swarmed with media. Cameras everywhere. Headlines screaming, "The socialite murder trial of the decade." Claire entered through a side door, holding 7-month-old Sophia in a carrier. The baby was healthy now, 5 pounds, thriving, perfect. Evidence of what survived. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Benjamin sat in the front row, jaw tight. His mother's remains had finally been laid to rest. 27 years of searching ended, justice coming at last. Victoria sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit and chains. Her hair was still perfect, makeup flawless. But chains couldn't lie. She was a prisoner now, just like all the women she'd destroyed. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Victoria smiled, cold and calculating. "Enjoy this," she mouthed. "It won't last." "Neither will you," Claire mouthed back. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Richard Moss testified about the doctored security footage. Amber Sterling detailed years of manipulation and blackmail. Detective Winters explained the investigation that uncovered Elizabeth Hartford's remains. But the most damning testimony came from Nate. He took the stand on day 12, wearing a simple suit, looking older than 35. The prosecutor asked him to explain his relationship with his mother. "She controlled everything," Nate said. "Who I dated, where I worked, who I married. I thought I was making my own choices, but looking back, I see her fingerprints on every decision. She wanted me to marry Claire not despite her Hartford blood, but because of it. She wanted to destroy another Hartford woman, and I was her weapon." Did you know Ms. Montgomery was a Hartford descendant when you married her? No, but my mother did. She had Claire's genealogy researched before we even met. The gallery opening where I first saw Claire, my mother arranged my invitation. She knew I'd be attracted to her. She orchestrated everything. A gasps rippled through the courtroom. Claire felt sick. Our entire relationship was a setup? She whispered to Maya. Looks like it, Maya replied grimly. But Nate wasn't finished. However, he continued, what my mother didn't plan on was me actually falling in love. That was real. Claire, if you're listening, that was always real. Victoria laughed. Actually laughed. The bailiff had to threaten her with contempt. My mother used Amber Sterling to drive a wedge between us, Nate explained. She arranged the affair, told Amber exactly how to seduce me, made sure Claire would find out in the most devastating way possible. Every step was calculated to break Claire, to make her leave with nothing, to destroy her completely. Why? The prosecutor asked. Revenge, Nate said flatly. 60-year-old revenge against a family that exposed her father's crimes. My mother has been systematically murdering Hartford descendants since the 1970s. Claire was supposed to be the last one, but Claire survived. And that's the thing about my mother. She can't stand losing. Claire was called to testify on day 15. She dressed carefully. Conservative blue dress, hair pulled back, minimal makeup. Sophia stayed with Maya in the gallery. Claire needed to do this alone. The prosecutor asked her to describe her relationship with Victoria. Claire took a breath and spoke clearly. Victoria Ashford tried to erase me, she said. My identity, my family, my future. She framed me for crimes I didn't commit. She turned my own family against me by paying them to cut contact. She blackmailed her head of security using his dying daughter. And when none of that worked, she tried to have me and my baby killed. Why do you think Mrs. Ashford targeted you specifically? Because my biological grandmother, Caroline Hartford, exposed Victoria's father for fraud in 1962. Victoria has been destroying Hartford family members ever since. I was just the latest in a 60-year killing spree. Are you afraid of her? Claire looked directly at Victoria. No, not anymore. Because I survived. And my daughter will grow up knowing that monsters can be defeated. That truth matters. That love, real love, is stronger than hatred and money and revenge. Victoria's face twisted with rage. You're nothing, she screamed, lunging toward the witness stand before bailiffs restrained her. Hartford trash, you've ruined everything. The judge banged his gavel. Mrs. Ashford, one more outburst and you'll be removed from these proceedings. But Victoria kept screaming as they dragged her from the courtroom. I should have killed you myself, just like I killed that bitch Elizabeth. Just like I'll kill you if I'd ever get free. The confession, recorded by 20 cameras and countless witnesses, sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood. On all 47 counts, we find the defendant, Victoria Ashford, guilty. Claire exhaled. Benjamin wept. Nate sat with his head in his hands. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following week, but everyone knew what it would be. Life without parole. Victoria Ashford would die in prison. As they led her from the courtroom, Victoria looked back one last time. This changes nothing, she said. The Ashford name will outlive all of you. The Ashford name died today, the judge replied. Take her away. Outside, the press swarmed. Claire held Sophia close, shielding her from camera flashes. Ms. Montgomery, how do you feel? Reporters shouted. I feel free, Claire said, for the first time in years. What's next? I'm going to raise my daughter, paint, live. And Nathaniel Ashford? Claire looked at Nate, standing apart from the crowd, giving her space. That's between us, she said. 1 week after the sentencing, Benjamin Hartford announced he was moving to Seattle. He invited Claire and Maya to dinner at his house, a last goodbye. I need a fresh start, Benjamin explained. This city has too many ghosts. My mother's everywhere I look. I understand, Claire said. Before I go, I need to say something. Benjamin took a breath. I've fallen in love with you. Claire's stomach dropped. Benjamin, you don't have to say anything. I know your heart is still with him, But I need you to know I could love you. I could give you stability, trust, a life without ghosts. You've been so good to me. But I'm not him, Benjamin said, and you need to figure out if that's a good thing or a bad thing. He kissed her forehead gently. Whatever you choose, you deserve happiness. Real happiness. After he left, Claire sat in the dark with Sophia sleeping on her chest. Two men, two possibilities. One past, one future. She didn't know which to choose. Months passed. Autumn arrived with golden leaves and crisp air. Claire opened her own art gallery in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. Small, intimate, filled with her paintings and work from local artists Victoria had blacklisted over the years. The Risen collection debuted in October. 20 paintings documenting Claire's journey from destruction to survival, dark canvases giving way to light, broken wings learning to fly again. Critics called it raw, powerful, essential. Montgomery's work speaks to every woman who's been torn down by society's elite, the Times wrote. Raw, powerful, unforgettable. Money from the paintings paid off medical bills, covered rent, built a small nest egg. Claire was still far from wealthy, but she was surviving, thriving even. Sophia grew, rolled over at 5 months, sat up at 6, babbled constantly, curious about everything. She had Nate's eyes but Claire's stubborn chin, the best and worst of both parents. Nate visited regularly, consistent and patient, never pushing. He sold his shares in Ashford Real Estate to Benjamin's restructured company, used the money to start a nonprofit counseling center for abuse victims, lived in a modest apartment in Queens, drove that Honda, worked 60-hour weeks helping people who had survived what Claire survived. I can't undo what I did, he told Claire one evening when he came to babysit. But I can help other people avoid my mistakes, teach them what I learned too late, which is that love is a choice you make every day, not a feeling that just happens. I chose wrong for years, chose my mother's approval, chose money, chose the easy path. I'm choosing differently now. Is it too late? Claire asked. For us, I mean. Nate looked at Sophia, sleeping in his arms. I don't know. That's up to you. Christmas Eve arrived like a gift. Snow fell gently outside Claire's gallery. She was preparing for a small opening, her first holiday exhibit. Home was the theme, what it meant, how to find it, how to build it from broken pieces. The gallery filled with people. Maya, Detective Winters, Art Brooks, Jennifer Thompson, visiting from witness protection. Even Richard Moss and his daughter Sarah, cancer-free now, thriving. Sophia toddled between guests at 18 months, chattering nonsense that sounded like wisdom. She grabbed everyone's hands, pulled them toward paintings, insisted they see everything. She's got your passion, Maya observed. And Nate's stubbornness, Claire replied. Speaking of, Maya nodded toward the door. Nate entered carrying a wrapped gift. He looked nervous, hopeful, terrified, all the things Claire felt when she saw him. Sophia spotted him immediately. Dada! She ran on unsteady legs, crashed into his knees. Hey, sweetheart. Nate scooped her up, buried his face in her hair. I missed you. They'd been having supervised visits for months, building a relationship. Sophia adored him. Nate was patient, attentive, showed up for every scheduled time, never missed, never made excuses. He approached Claire. The gallery is beautiful. Congratulations. Thank you for coming. I got Sophia something, if that's okay. Claire nodded. Nate handed her a small box. She opened it carefully. Inside was a snow globe. 3 figures, mother, father, child, stood on a bridge. Behind them, a small cabin in the woods. Safe. Together. Home. Nate, Claire's voice broke. I'm not asking to come back, he said quickly. I'm just asking you to remember. We were beautiful once. Maybe we could be again. I'm scared. So am I, but I've learned something this year. Being scared doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It means what you're trying for matters. Sophia grabbed both their hands. Mama, Dada. She pulled them together, giggling. Claire looked at Nate, really looked. Saw a man who'd spent a year proving he could change. Who'd given up everything to become someone worthy of a second chance. Come to Christmas dinner tomorrow, she said. Just dinner. Hope bloomed in Nate's eyes. Just dinner? We'll see what happens after that. He smiled, genuine, humble, grateful. I'll bring wine. Make it cider. I'm still nursing. They laughed, actually laughed together for the first time in 2 years. It felt like coming home. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Claire's small apartment, modest but filled with love, smelled like cinnamon and pine. She decorated simply. A small tree, stockings for her and Sophia. One extra, just in case. Nate arrived at 1:30, 30 minutes early. You're early, bro, Claire said, opening the door. I've wasted enough time being late. Inside, dinner was simple. Roasted chicken, vegetables, bread, nothing fancy, nothing Victoria would approve of. Everything real. They said grace, a habit Father Ryan had taught them years ago. For food, for family, for second chances, Nate and Claire said together. Amen, Sophia shouted, making them laugh. Dinner conversation flowed naturally. They talked about Sophia's development, Claire's gallery, Nate's counseling work, topics that mattered, real connection. After dishes, they sat on the couch. Sophia played with blocks between them, building towers and knocking them down with glee. This doesn't mean we're back together, Claire said. I know, but it doesn't mean we won't be party. What does it mean? It means we're figuring it out, together. Sophia climbed into Nate's lap, then Claire's, pulling them closer. Family, she said clearly. Her newest word. Claire and Nate's hands touched. Neither pulled away. Yeah, baby, Claire whispered. Family. Snow fell outside. Inside, 3 people sat together. Not perfect, not healed completely, but together. And that was everything. Detective Winters called the next morning with news. Victoria had died in prison overnight. Heart attack. 62 years old. I thought you'd want to know, Detective Winters said. Thank you, Claire replied. She didn't feel joy, didn't feel revenge satisfied, just relief. A chapter closing. The monster defeated not through violence, but through justice. She told Nate over coffee. They were sitting at her small kitchen table, Sophia in her high chair, when Claire's phone rang. She's gone, Claire said after hanging up. Nate was quiet for a long moment. I should feel something, he said finally. But I don't. She stopped being my mother years ago. I'm sorry anyway. Don't be. She made her choices, spent 60 years destroying people. In the end, she destroyed herself. They sat in silence, processing. Finally, Sophia threw a piece of banana, hitting Nate in the face. They both laughed, grateful for the interruption. Life goes on, Claire said. Yeah, Nate agreed. It does. Spring arrived like a promise. Cherry blossoms blooming, birds singing, Sophia's second birthday approaching, Claire's gallery thriving, Nate's nonprofit helping dozens of families monthly. And slowly, carefully, Claire and Nate rebuilt something neither had words for. Not the beautiful love story from 7 years ago. Something different. Something earned through pain and patience and choosing each other again, every day. They went to couples therapy, confronted the affairs, the lies, the damage. Nate took full responsibility. No excuses, no blame shifting, just honest acknowledgement of harm done. I was weak, he said in one session. I let my mother control me because it was easier than standing up to her. I cheated because I was a coward. I hurt you because I was selfish. Those are my choices, my failures. Can you guarantee you won't do it again? The therapist asked. No, Nate said honestly. I can only guarantee I'll choose differently today, tomorrow. Every day I'm lucky enough to have. Claire appreciated the honesty, not promises of perfection, just commitment to trying. 3 months of therapy, 6 months of supervised co-parenting, 9 months of slowly, carefully learning to trust again. On Sophia's second birthday, Nate showed up with a gift for Claire instead of their daughter. What's this? Claire asked. Open it. Inside was a key, simple, silver, labeled home. I bought a house, Nate explained. Small in Brooklyn near your gallery. 3 bedrooms, one for you, one for Sophia, one for a studio. If you want it, no pressure, but I wanted you to know I'm building something for us, if there's ever an us again. Claire held the key, felt its weight, possibility, future, hope. Can I see it? She asked. They drove together, Sophia singing off-key in her car seat. The house was perfect. Not a mansion, a home, wooden floors, big windows, a yard with space for gardens. The third bedroom has north-facing light, Nate said, perfect for painting. For Claire walked through empty rooms, imagining filling them with furniture, with laughter, with family. I can't promise anything, she said finally. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance. Then yes, we'll try. Nate exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. Yeah? Yeah. Sophia ran between them. Home, she shouted. Home, home, home. Out of the mouths of babes. 18 months later, Christmas Eve arrived again. Full circle. Different completely. Claire stood in her studio, the north-facing room Nate had promised, finishing a painting for the gallery's holiday show. Sophia, now 3.5, was helping by adding handprints to a corner canvas meant for exactly that purpose. Mama, look! Sophia held up paint-covered hands. I made art. You sure did, baby. Claire kissed the top of her head, leaving a smudge of blue paint in blonde curls. Nate appeared in the doorway, smiling. Father Ryan just called. He can see us at 4 if we want. Claire's heart skipped. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. The church was the same one where they'd married 8 years ago. Father Ryan, older now, with more gray hair, waited at the altar. No crowd this time. Just Maya as witness, Benjamin visiting from Seattle, Dr. Brooks, Detective Winters, and Sophia as flower girl. Claire wore a simple white dress, not a wedding gown, just a dress that made her feel beautiful. Nate wore khakis and a sweater, nothing expensive, everything real. We're gathered here today, Father Ryan began, to witness something rare, not a first marriage, but a second chance. Nathaniel and Claire, you've walked through fire. You've been broken and rebuilt. You've learned the hardest lesson, that love is a choice, not a feeling. That showing up matters more than grand gestures. That forgiveness is possible, but it must be earned. Claire's hands shook as she held Nate's. Nathaniel, Father Ryan said, what do you promise? I promise to show up every day, even when it's hard. I promise to choose us over everything else. I promise to be honest, even when truth hurts. I promise to love this woman and our daughter with everything I am. Claire, what do you promise? I promise to trust, even when I'm scared. I promise to give second chances when they're earned. I promise to never lose myself again. I promise to build a life that's ours, not anyone else's. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Again. They kissed, soft, hopeful, real, not the passionate kiss of young lovers, the gentle kiss of people who'd survived war together. Sophia clapped. Mama and Dada married. Everyone laughed through tears. The reception was at Claire's gallery, small, intimate, filled with people who'd helped them survive. Maya gave a toast about friendship outlasting stupidity. Benjamin spoke about second chances being the most beautiful kind of grace. Detective Winters said justice felt sweeter when it led to happiness. Claire's art covered the walls, the Risen collection from 2 years ago. New pieces, work in progress. Every painting told their story, from darkness to light, from broken to whole. This is the most beautiful love story, Maya said during her toast. Not because it was perfect, because it was real, because they fought for it. Later, after guests left and Sophia had crashed from sugar, Claire and Nate slow danced in the empty gallery. No music playing, just silence and each other. Are you happy? Nate asked. Yes, Claire said, surprised to realize it was true. I'm happy. Even after everything? Because of everything. We're not the same people who got married 8 years ago. We're better, harder, stronger, real. I love you, Nate said. I know I said it before when I didn't know what it meant, but I know now. It means choosing you. Every day, forever. I love you too, Claire replied. And I hate that I still do, and I'm grateful that I still can. They swayed together until Sophia woke up, crying from a nightmare. Both parents responded immediately. Both held her. Both soothed her. Both present. Both trying. Both choosing family over everything else. That night, tucking Sophia into bed in their new house, the house they'd made a home, Claire felt peace. Not perfect peace. Life wasn't perfect. Nate was still learning to stand up to his family's legacy. Claire still had days where she couldn't trust him completely. They still fought, still struggled, still had moments of doubt. But they had each other and their daughter, and a love story that had died and come back to life stronger. "Tell me a story," Sophia demanded, "about Mama and Dada." "Once upon a time," Nate began, "there was a man who had everything and a woman who had nothing but dreams. They fell in love. But the man forgot how to choose love. He lost his way." "That's sad," Sophia said. "It is," Claire agreed. "But then the man remembered, and the woman learned to give second chances, and they found their way back to each other." Happy ending? Claire looked at Nate, at their daughter, at the life they'd built from ashes. "Yeah, baby," she said. "Happy ending." Years later, journalists would ask Claire about the Ashford case, about Victoria, about survival. She'd give the same answer every time. The most beautiful love stories aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones that break and then choose to heal. Not because it's easy, because it's worth it. Her paintings sold in galleries worldwide. Sophia grew up strong and fierce and kind, knowing her mother had survived hell to give her a better life. Nate spent decades counseling abuse victims, turning his failures into help for others. Benjamin remarried, finally letting go of ghosts. Maya became a judge, fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Detective Winters retired but kept in touch, sending Christmas cards every year. And on the Ashford estate, now converted into a shelter for domestic violence survivors, a plaque read, "In memory of Elizabeth Hartford and all women destroyed by those who valued money over humanity. May their stories teach us that love, real love, is always worth fighting for." Claire visited once, years later, brought flowers, stood where Victoria had buried Benjamin's mother, felt the weight of history, all those women, all that pain, all that waste. "She lost," Claire said aloud. "She spent 60 years destroying people, and in the end, love won anyway." The wind rustled through trees Victoria had planted to hide her crimes. Now they shaded women rebuilding lives. Beauty growing from darkness. Full circle. Healed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, second marriage, counting both ceremonies, Nate took Claire back to the art gallery where they'd met. The Bradford Gallery, still standing, still showing abstract paintings that looked like chaos becoming beauty. They stood before the same painting where he'd first spoken to her, 13 years ago. A lifetime. "What do you see now?" Claire asked, echoing their first conversation. "I see us," Nate said. "Chaos that fought to become something beautiful. And won." Claire smiled, took his hand. "Yeah, we won." They had, not perfectly, not easily, but completely. And that, in the end, was the most beautiful love story of all. 5 years after the trial, the world had moved on. Victoria Ashford became a true crime documentary, a cautionary tale, a woman so consumed by revenge that she destroyed herself and everyone around her. But for Claire, Victoria was just a closed chapter. A nightmare survived. She thought about her rarely now. Only when Sophia asked questions about Grammy Victoria, the grandmother she'd never met, the woman whose genes she carried but whose legacy she'd never inherit. "Why was she mean?" Sophia asked one evening. She was 8 now, precocious and curious, reading chapter books and asking questions that didn't have easy answers. Claire and Nate exchanged glances. They'd agreed to be honest with their daughter, age appropriately. "She was hurt when she was young," Claire explained. "Someone did something bad to her family, and instead of healing from it, she spent her whole life hurting other people back." "That's sad," Sophia said. "It is," Nate agreed. "It's very sad. She could have chosen differently, could have built something beautiful instead of destroying things. But she didn't." "Is that why you chose to build the shelter?" Sophia asked her father. "Instead of destroying?" Nate smiled. "Yes, exactly that." The Ashford estate had indeed become a shelter. After Victoria's conviction and death, all family assets had been liquidated. Benjamin Hartford, now the majority shareholder in what was once Ashford Real Estate, had restructured the company completely. They built affordable housing, created shelters, funded programs for abuse survivors. The Ashford name, once synonymous with wealth and cruelty, now represented something else entirely. Redemption, second chances, the possibility of change. Claire's gallery had expanded, from one room to three, from Brooklyn to a second location in Manhattan. The Hartford Gallery, where broken things become art, was featured in architecture magazines, art journals, even psychology textbooks. Your work speaks to trauma survivors everywhere, a curator from the Guggenheim told Claire during a meeting about a potential retrospective. The way you document the journey from destruction to healing, it's remarkable. I just painted my truth, Claire said. That's what makes it universal. And the retrospective opened the following year. From Ashes, the Claire Hartford Montgomery story featured 90 paintings spanning a decade. From the dark, angry pieces she'd created during her marriage's decline to the hopeful, luminous work she made now. You could see healing happen across canvas, could watch a woman break and rebuild herself, stroke by stroke. Nate attended the opening, standing beside her, proud, supportive, present. "You're going to be famous," he whispered. "I don't want famous," Claire replied. "I just want truth." But fame came anyway. Book deals, interview requests, speaking engagements. Claire accepted some, declined most. She spoke at domestic violence shelters, at art schools, at women's prisons, places where her story might help someone else survive. The most beautiful love story isn't about staying together no matter what, she told a room full of abuse survivors one afternoon. It's about knowing when to leave, knowing your worth, fighting for yourself, and then, if someone proves they've changed, maybe considering a second chance, but only if they've earned it. "How do you know if they've earned it?" someone asked. "Time," Claire said. "Consistency, actions, not words. My husband spent 18 months proving he'd changed before I took him back. 18 months of therapy, of showing up, of doing the work. If someone won't do that work, they don't deserve a second chance." Maya retired from law at 50, opened her own nonprofit focusing on legal aid for women in domestic violence situations. She and Claire worked together frequently, combining art therapy with legal assistance. "We're like superheroes," Maya joked one day, "fighting evil with paintbrushes and subpoenas." "The worst superheroes ever," Claire laughed. "The best," Maya corrected, "because we're real." Benjamin Hartford remarried at 45, a kind woman named Rachel who worked in urban planning. They had a daughter named Elizabeth after Benjamin's mother. The little girl who was lost had a namesake who would grow up loved. Benjamin invited Claire and Nate to the baby naming ceremony. It felt like closing a circle. Hartford family, once nearly destroyed, thriving again. "My mother would have loved this," Benjamin said, holding baby Elizabeth. "All of this, the shelter, the rebuilding, the redemption. She believed in second chances." "So do I," Claire said, "obviously." They laughed, survivors laughing. The best sound in the world. Detective Winters retired but kept in touch. She volunteered at the shelter, taught self-defense classes, mentored young officers. She'd spent 30 years in law enforcement, 20 of those investigating Victoria Ashford's crimes. "You gave me closure," she told Claire once. "I spent my entire career watching wealthy people get away with murder. Victoria's conviction showed me that sometimes, occasionally, justice wins." "I'm glad," Claire said, "but I'm sorry it took so long." Better late than never. They became friends, these women who'd survived Victoria's orbit. Jennifer Thompson, who emerged from witness protection after Victoria died. Lisa Chen, who left the psychiatric hospital and rebuilt her life. Claire, Maya, Detective Winters. They formed a support group, met monthly, reminded each other that survival was possible. "We're the ones who made it," Jennifer said one evening. "The lucky ones." "Not lucky," Lisa corrected. "Strong. We survived because we fought. And because we had help," Claire added. "None of us did this alone." That was the truth Victoria never understood. She thought power meant standing alone, crushing everyone in your path. But real power was connection, community, people lifting each other up. On Sophia's 10th birthday, Claire threw a party at the gallery. 50 kids running through exhibit halls, eating cake, laughing. Normal childhood things Claire had been terrified her daughter would never experience. Nate stood beside her while watching Sophia blow out candles. "We did it," he said quietly. "We gave her a happy childhood." "We're still doing it," Claire corrected, "every day." "Think she'll resent us someday for all the baggage we gave her?" "Maybe," Claire said honestly, "but we'll deal with it. We'll deal with it together." "Together," Nate echoed. His hand found hers. 10 years of second chances, 10 years of choosing each other, 10 years of proving that broken things could be repaired if you cared enough to do the work. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. That night after the party, after Sophia was asleep, Claire and Nate sat on their porch, spring air, stars overhead, peace settling around them like a blanket. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't cheated?" Nate asked. "If my mother hadn't tried to destroy you, if we'd just been normal?" "We'd probably be divorced anyway," Claire said. "Just later and messier." "You think?" "We weren't ready for marriage. Too young, too naive. We needed to break to learn how to be together properly." "That's a generous interpretation." "Maybe, but I think it's true. The couple we were at 25 couldn't have survived life. We hadn't been tested, hadn't learned what mattered. And now we have?" "Now we have," Claire confirmed. "And we're still choosing each other. That's worth more than perfect." Nate pulled her close. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a second chance. Most people wouldn't have. Most people didn't spend 18 months proving they changed. You earned it. I'll keep earning it. Every day. Forever." "Good," Claire said, "because I'm not going anywhere." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars, thinking about journeys traveled. From beautiful beginning to ugly middle to hard-won ending that was really just another beginning. This was the most beautiful love story. Not because it was easy, because it was true. Years collapsed like origami. Sophia grew up fierce and kind, graduating high school with honors, heading to art school with her mother's talent and her father's stubborn determination. She studied trauma-informed art therapy, wanting to help others heal the way her mother had. "You're going to change the world," Claire told her the day she left for college. "I learned from the best," Sophia replied. Claire's retrospective traveled to museums worldwide. The Hartford Gallery expanded to 4 locations. Claire published a memoir about survival that became required reading in women's studies courses. But she never forgot where she came from. Never forgot the women who didn't make it out. Every Christmas Eve, she visited the shelter built on Victoria's estate, brought gifts, shared her story, reminded residents that survival was possible, that monsters could be defeated, that beautiful things could grow from ashes. Nate's nonprofit grew too. The Ashford Second Chance Center counseled thousands of families. Nate trained other counselors, wrote papers about rehabilitation and redemption, became an expert on breaking cycles of abuse. "Ironic," Maya commented once. "The Ashford name means something good now." Victoria would hate it. "Good," Nate said. "She spent her life building monuments to cruelty. I'll spend mine building monuments to change." 20 years after Victoria's death, Claire turned 52. Sophia was 30, married to a kind social worker named Marcus, pregnant with Claire's first grandchild. The cycle of life continuing, getting better with each generation. Christmas Eve fell on a Thursday that year. Claire closed the gallery early, drove home through snow to the house she and Nate had shared for 2 decades. The house that had witnessed 20 Christmases, 20 years of choosing each other, 20 years of proving that second chances could work. Nate met her at the door with hot chocolate. His hair was gray now, lines around his eyes, but he was more handsome at 55 than he'd been at 28. Character made faces beautiful. "How was the shelter visit?" he asked. "Good. Sarah Rodriguez was there. Remember her?" "Richard Moss's daughter, the one with leukemia. She's cancer-free 15 years now, working as a nurse, helps run the medical clinic at the shelter." "Full circle," Nate said. "Everything is," Claire agreed. They sat together on the couch, looking at the Christmas tree Sophia had helped decorate last weekend. Photos hung from branches. Baby Sophia, toddler Sophia, Sophia graduating, Sophia's wedding, and older photos too. Claire and Nate's first wedding, their second wedding, Maya, Benjamin, Detective Winters, Dr. Brooks, everyone who'd helped them survive. Do you ever think about her? Nate asked. My mother? Sometimes, Claire admitted. Not often. She's just a story I tell now. The monster we defeated. Do you think she could have changed? If she'd wanted to? Maybe. Anyone can change if they want it badly enough. But Victoria didn't want to change. She liked being cruel. That's sad. It is, but it was her choice. We all make choices. Nate, you made yours. I made mine. She made hers. And our choices led here, Nate said, gesturing at their home. Their life. 20 years of hard-won happiness. Yeah, Claire smiled. They did. Christmas morning arrived clear and bright. Sophia and Marcus came for breakfast, bringing gifts and laughter and news that they were having a girl. A daughter, Claire breathed. You're having a daughter. We're naming her Caroline, Sophia said, after your biological grandmother, the Hartford who started everything. Tears streamed down Claire's face. She would be honored. She would be proud, Sophia corrected, of what you built from what Victoria tried to destroy, of reclaiming the Hartford name, of proving that love wins. They spent the day together. 4 generations of family, including James Ashford Sr., who'd gotten sober, left Victoria's shadow, rebuilt relationships with his son and granddaughter. The old man looked peaceful now, free. I'm sorry, James said to Claire, not for the first time, for everything Victoria did, for not stopping her. You were a victim who, Claire replied gently. We all were, but we survived. We're all still here. Merry Christmas, Claire. Merry Christmas, James. After dinner, after dishes, after guests left, Claire and Nate walked through their neighborhood. Christmas lights glowed in windows. Families gathered, life happening everywhere. They stopped at the park where they'd had their first picnic 25 years ago. The same park, different people, same love. Do you remember? Nate asked. Everything, Claire said, the good, the bad, the terrible, all of it. Would you change any of it, if you could? Claire thought carefully. No, because changing it would change who we are now, and I like who we are. Even with all the pain, especially with the pain. Pain taught us what mattered and taught us to choose carefully, taught us that love isn't a feeling. It's a decision you make every morning. I choose you, Nate said, every morning, for 20 years, forever. I choose you too, Claire replied, not because you're perfect, because you're real, because you did the work, because you earned it. They kissed in the snow, 2 people who'd been married twice, divorced once, broken and rebuilt more times than they could count. 2 people who'd survived war and came out stronger. This was the most beautiful love story, not because it started perfectly, because it refused to end. That night, alone in their bedroom after Nate fell asleep, Claire pulled out her journal. She'd kept one since the day she left Nate at the plaza. A record of survival, of healing, of choosing hope, even when hope seemed impossible. She wrote one final entry. Dear Sophia, dear Caroline, my granddaughter to come. Dear every woman who reads this someday, this is what I learned from the most beautiful love story of my life. Love is not about staying no matter what. It's about knowing when to leave and when to return. It's about choosing yourself first, always. About knowing your worth. About refusing to be erased. It's about giving second chances to people who earn them through actions, not words, through time, consistency, and change. It's about building something real instead of something pretty, about truth over appearances, about connection over perfection. It's about surviving the monsters, both external and internal, about learning that you're stronger than you know, braver than you feel, more worthy than anyone ever told you. Victoria Ashford tried to erase me. She failed. Not because I was stronger than her, but because I refused to let hatred win. Because I chose love. Love for myself, for my daughter, eventually for a man who proved he could change. This is the most beautiful love story, not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And real is the only kind of beautiful that lasts. I love you, future daughter, future granddaughter. Remember this, you are Hartford women. You come from survivors. You carry the strength of women who refuse to be broken. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. Use it fiercely. And if you ever find yourself in darkness, remember, morning always comes. Sometimes you just have to survive the night first. With all my love, Claire Hartford, Montgomery, Christmas Day, 20 years after. She closed the journal, set it aside for Sophia to read someday. Then she curled against Nate's warmth, hand on his heart, feeling it beat steady and strong. Outside, snow fell on a world that had tried to break her and failed. Inside, a family slept safe. And Claire Montgomery, who became Claire Ashford, who became Claire Hartford Montgomery, who became simply Claire, survivor, autist, mother, wife, warrior, finally, completely, peacefully closed her eyes. The most beautiful love story wasn't over. It was just beginning again. Every morning, every choice, forever.